As promised, Biden has nominated, CNN calls him a former Trump appointee to the Public Diplomacy Commission. It's much worse than that. I'm talking about Elliott Abrams. He was a special representative for Iran and Venezuela in the Department of State during the Trump fake presidency. And when Trump's fake presidency ended more or less with the occupation of the White House by Joe Biden, legally and properly, I thought Elliott Abrams for sure would just disappear, maybe step off the curb without looking both ways in D.C. and a UPS truck come by and boom, but no such luck. So Biden announced this week that he's going to nominate this guy to the U.S. Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy. Elliott Abrams is a murderous warmonger son of a bitch whose past atrocities in Latin America, I'm sure Biden knows about. I mean, everybody who studied recent American history, okay, 40 years ago maybe, during the Reagan years. Come on, Joe, Jesus Christ. Abrams served in 3 Republican administrations, most recently the Orange Bastards. And when he was working for the Orange Bastard, his job at the time was trying to overthrow Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro. This is what Elliott Abrams does. He is a violent, warmongering son of a bitch in the mode of Henry Kissinger. He doesn't care how many people die. He doesn't care how many governments are destroyed. This is Elliott Abrams. Now, back in 1991, for Christ's sake, he entered a guilty plea. It was part of a plea bargain for withholding information about the Iran-Contra affair. And that got him 2 misdemeanor counts, 2 years probation and 100 hours of community service. And then these atrocious crimes that this bastard committed were later pardoned. He was pardoned by President George H.W. Bush, who was involved in the Iran-Contra deal up to his eyeballs, too. Now, if you don't know the Iran-Contra situation and what it amounted to, and how many people died, and how the presidency was twisted and perverted, and taken away the re-election of Jimmy Carter, you need to do some research. Just go to Wikipedia and look up Iran-Contra. The Contras, the word Contra refers to a counter-revolutionary organization put together by the CIA to overthrow the Sandinista government that overthrew, it was put together by the CIA to overthrow the Sandinista government, which was named for a guy named Sandino, I can't think of his first name, who was a revolutionary in Nicaragua decades ago, a century ago, trying to overthrow the dictatorial government that ran that country. And the U.S., of course, backed the dictator that not Chavez, but, oh, damn it, come on. I hate this. I hate this when I draw these brain farts. What's his name? How many times have I said, what's his name? It'll come to me. Anyway, Abrams was involved in the illegal attempt to overthrow the government of Nicaragua after the revolutionaries, kind of like what happened in Cuba. So the secret Iran-Contra operation took place during Abrams' time as an assistant secretary of state in the Reagan administration. And that involved the funding, I like the way CNN puts it, anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua. Bullshit. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, absolutely. Only it wasn't anti-communist rebels. It was anti-nationalist, people who wanted to run their own country. Somoza was the dictator that was overthrown, backed by the United States, him and his father before him. We sent the Marines there in, 1918, 1920? We sent the Marines to Nicaragua to install Somoza's old man as the dictator of Nicaragua. Because the American corporations, most notably United Fruit Company, they said, these Nicaraguans, they think they're living in their own country. It's really our big banana plantation. So we got to get rid of them. So we sent the Marines there in the early part of the 20th century. The Marines got rid of whoever was running the government and installed Somoza, the old man, the father. That went on for a while, and then Somoza Jr. took over, kind of like the Marcos family, kind of like all these dictators, like Syria. This is how it works. So then, in the late 70s is when the Nicaraguan rebels, the Sandinistas, said enough of this shit and ran Somoza out of the country. And both Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan fought against the revolutionaries in Nicaragua. It's just a sorry chapter in the history of this country. So the Iran-Contra, the secret operation, was put together by the Reagan administration before he was president. And it involved the funding of the so-called counter-revolutionaries, the ones who had decided they were going to get rid of the Sandinistas. And what the Reagan administration did, with Elliott Abrams helping them, they used the proceeds from weapons sales to Iran. We sold them TOW missiles, even though there was a congressional ban on doing such a thing. But here again, you do understand at this time, by this time, that Christian fascists, even back in the Reagan administration, they don't give a shit about congressional deals or treaties or laws or rules. They couldn't care less. So we sold weapons, and this is when Americans were still being held hostage in Iran. And the Reagan administration said, okay, we'll cut you a deal. We'll sell you some weapons. You give us some money that we're going to use here in Central America. And as soon as Reagan is elected, you release our hostages. And that's the deal. And, of course, the Iranian says, sure, which is exactly what happened. But in his role under Reagan, Abrams was blasted by Human Rights Watch, among other human rights organizations, for his attempt in a Senate hearing in February of 1982, after Reagan had been elected, to downplay reports of the massacre of 1,000 people. I'm talking about in the town of El Mozote. How many people remember that? El Mozote, Nicaragua. Those 1,000 people, men, women, children, babies, were the targets of U.S.-trained and equipped military units in the Salvadoran town. I'm sorry, I said Nicaragua, but this was in El Salvador, because Abrams was active in destabilizing, overthrowing governments in all of Central America. But in the Salvadoran town of El Mozote, it was the largest mass killing at the time in recent Latin American history. During his testimony, this murderous son of a bitch Abrams insisted that the numbers of reported victims were implausible. And he lavished huge praise during his testimony on the murderers who killed all those people. And he doubled down on his actions when, in 2019, what he had done was put on display during the House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing. They were put on display by Representative Ilhan Omar, the Minnesota Democrat, who used his history in Latin America to call into question his credibility, his decency, his humanity, all of which Abrams has none, not a goddamn bit. And I don't want to hear, oh, well, he's reformed. No, he hasn't. No, he hasn't. I mean, how could you do this, Joe Biden? Elliott Abrams, who should have been sent to Guantanamo. If we're going to send political prisoners someplace, I mean, we sent them all over the world after we invaded Afghanistan for torture. And of course, torture is now a U.S. policy choice. But if we're going to do that, why didn't we send Elliott Abrams there? This old son of a bitch, during the Reagan years, he looked like a young vampire. Now he looks like an old dictator. Look up his picture, Elliott Abrams. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.